Single game daily fantasy can be fun even for really bad games because you can embrace the suck and just kind of live in the mud there. But this week, we get the 49ers versus the Chiefs in Super Bowl 58, and that is about as fun as it gets. Christian McCaffrey, Patrick Mahomes, and all the fun players on both sides. We're going to break down this game from a DFS perspective, let you know where we see value over on FanDuel and our top plays for Super Bowl 58 single game DFS. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as I am every Thursday by Brandon Gdula. Check him out on Twitter at Gdula13. Find his work at FanDuel Research, where he is a senior managing editor. Brandon, happy Super Bowl week to you. How you doing today?
Good. Super Bowl week. It's always a little bit bittersweet, but we got a good matchup. You know, could have had maybe some better narratives if the Lions got there or, the Ravens got there. But, we got the rematch, narrative this week. Mahomes going for really putting the pressure on all the other quarterbacks going today of being kind of untouchable in his era. So, it's the Chris Conley revenge game. So
that's all that matters. What else could you need as a selling point for this other than Chris Conley revenge game? Do you think he'll be active? Because I'm leaning towards yes, personally, but
if they want to win, yeah.
I mean, he's a good run blocker. They could use that here, try to, mess him up on the ground. So we got to see Chris Conley out there. He's already won one at least, correct? Or has he won 2 Super Bowls?
I don't know.
You should know.
It's just a bit. It's just a bit.
It's not a bit. Don't lie.
That's the kind of stuff that you would know, but I wouldn't know.
You should know this about the one NFL player you care about. You should know this.
I just purge all the information, then we're on to the next.
That's very fair and probably good from an analyst perspective. So what we'll do today is try to help you binge all the information for Super Bowl 58, let you know where we're seeing value, outline some key trends, usages to note, and get you ready for Super Bowl 58 DFS on FanDuel. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts, because although the NFL podcast is done after this weekend, we've still got UFC via Austin Swain. We have got NBA via Tom Vecchio, and of course, the PGA podcast, a combo betting and DFS show now every Tuesday, getting you ready for that week's PGA Tour event. So go to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcast. If you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and also check out the PGA show and the Daily ISO over on FanDuel TV Plus. Last year at the Super Bowl, Rob Gronkowski went wide left on FanDuel's Kick of Destiny, but now he's back for Kick of Destiny 2, and this time you can play along. All you have to do is choose if Gronk will make or miss. Get your free pick in right now, because if you're right, you win a share of $10 million in bonus bets. $10 million is a lot of money. Everyone can get in on the action when Gronk takes his shot at redemption before Super Bowl 58. Whether your team make or team miss, just head to the FanDuel Sportsbook app and get your pick in. It is absolutely free. Then tune in before the game to see Gronk's kick live. You want to share $10 million in bonus bets if you're right. Brandon, are you team make or team miss for Gronk?
Make.
Your conviction in that makes me question if you're actually team make. Are you lying to make him feel better? Because Gronk and I are hat brothers. He's been on the Up and Adam show wearing this hat. So I feel like I had to go team make to honor my hat brother, Rob Gronkowski, with whom I have many similarities.
Well, he's got, I don't want to go against John Cena, who's saying he's going to miss, but, in the end, like John says, never give up.
No one else has ever said that before.
He's got a lot of merch with it. He's probably made more money off of it than anyone else before. So I think I'm going to go. Sorry, John. I know he's a big fan of the show, but I'm going to go with Gronk making it, getting that redemption. And then who knows, maybe rubber match next year. Who could say?
So we're both team make. Okay, what could
Yeah, of
possibly go
course.
wrong there? Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. No purchase necessary. $10 million prize pool to be split equally among all eligible participants who made the correct pick. Prize issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook or FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Autopilot Gym. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and Vermont. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text next step to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700, visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana, visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Let's dig in now to 49ers versus Chiefs. Right now, FanDuel Sportsbook, the Niners are favored by 2.5, -105 on that side, -115 on the Chiefs, +2.5. Total in this game is held steady at 47.5 ever since open. There is no weather to note here because we are indoors. God bless a dome. Injuries here to note. Jerick McKinnon got in a limited practice on Wednesday as he returns from a groin injury, but Andy Reid said that McKinnon isn't doing much, so it sounds like McKinnon unlikely to return this week, which is massive for Isaiah Pacheco. Guard Joe Thuney missed practice with a pec injury, also seems unlikely to go. He could, but it seems unlikely. Thuney also missed the conference championship game. And then George Kittle was limited with a toe injury. He said he'll be good to go, but it's at least noteworthy that he is not at 100% right now. My MVP pick for betting, not for daily fantasy, George Kittle 70-1. That is not feeling as good anymore. Brandon, before we dive into the DFS of it all, how do you see this game going down? Because that does influence a lot how we view things for DFS as well.
Yeah, so my baseline, depending on which sort of samples I use, the one constant is points, leaning toward the over. That's not what we're here to talk about, is like whether we would take the over or not. But
I would.
okay,
Sorry.
That's not what I'm here to do. That's the way that I would lean. But even on sort of the low end, I'm in like the 47.5 range, and then every other sort of sample I use puts me above that. So leaning toward there being points, and that naturally changes things. It makes a single game DFS a little more quarterback friendly because you need some touchdowns, you need yardage, efficiency, and that's typically tied to overall points. I will say that my pure model likes the 49ers against the spread a little bit. I have a hard time. I like the 49ers a lot. I know how good they can be, but I've been on the record with this Chiefs team saying that, kind of kicking myself for not getting in earlier. I should have, but they had a tough road ahead in the playoffs. But what I see is points. I don't have a firm take on which side I prefer. Again, my model says the 49ers. My heart and my all my film watching acumen says the Chiefs. So there we go.
Yeah, I also think there'll be a lot of points here. My model has a total at 49.97 as the average, not the median, which is important to note. But 49.97 for my total here. I also have the Niners as more heavily favored than the spread and indicate more than the field goal here. So we're on the same page there. And I think that I feel okay about my number saying that, in large part because they just kind of had a lot of like weird flukiness in the first two rounds. And I think it's allowed us to forget how good this offense is. And they still showed that during those games. They started slow, but baby, did they finish hot against the Lions. I know that they benefited from that fluke catch for Ayuk, but like there were a lot of good plays beyond that too. And I think they'll be able to have answers for what the Chiefs try to do against them defensively. So for me, it's a situation where both my model and my eyes agree that lean towards the Niners, but feel like the market's decently efficient there. And then a heavier lean towards the over, which does mean I expect there to be a pretty good number of points in this game. So let's take a look now at the salaries over at FanDuel Sportsbook for this game. Christian McCaffrey, $17,500 and a big jump off down to Patrick Mahomes at $15,000. Brandon, let's begin things here by talking about McCaffrey because he is really the headliner here for this game. 17.5 is a lot, but also 17.5 for a reason. So for me, I feel like he kind of has to be like your baseline assumption MVP for this game on FanDuel. Of course, if you're new to playing DFS on FanDuel, single game DFS, you can put a player in your MVP slot. They'll earn 1.5x points, and they do not have a different salary to be at MVP versus other spots. So effectively, you're picking of the 5 players in your single game lineup, who will be the highest scoring player. So I think that McCaffrey is kind of that guy. And we'll talk about some perfect lineup trends and kind of what you've noticed based on the data here in a second. But let's start things off with McCaffrey because I do believe he is the true headliner here.
Yeah, so anyone who's listened to the show for like the whole year knows that we have a pretty organized structure. When it gets into playoffs and single game stuff, we kind of get a little bit all over the place. So like I got a ton of matchup notes that I'll probably forget to mention in McCaffrey's favor too. But if you look at the all the games with this team's big 5, if you include Purdy, full playing relevant snaps, basically, not leaving early. He is averaging 136.2 scrimmage yards per game. I know that might differ from the relevant sample that you have for him, but that's an absurd number. His adjusted opportunities per game in my sample, adjusted opportunities for us, carries plus double your targets because targets are on average worth twice as many FanDuel points as a carry for running backs. 28.9, that's about as good as it gets in today's NFL. 81% route rate. 66% of the team's red zone carries. Whenever someone has such a good red zone role, it is really hard to even envision what like a ceiling is because with conversion on 3 of 5 red zone attempts or something like that, because red zone's within the 20, but he's also getting goal line work. You have to ask yourself a lot of questions whenever you're building a single game lineup. Is McCaffrey going to go nuts? Well, if he doesn't, how good is he still? The reality is that, like you said, he's the default assumption at MVP, and then you pivot from there. My simulations have him around 37% likely to lead in FanDuel points. It's not, 50% like sometimes when we get a Lamar Jackson or something like that, but it is pretty relevant for sure.
Yeah, the sample I looked at here is when they had the big 4 healthy, so I didn't include Purdy, but I think he's played. He started every game, at least for them, outside of Week 18. But in that sample, McCaffrey's been the highest scoring guy in 5 out of 10 games. Deebo Samuel twice, Brock Purdy twice, Brandon Ayuk once. So he is like about half the time if you expect the Niners to have the highest scoring guy. And I think that would be my baseline assumption, not because I think the Niners will win, but because they just tend to have more fantasy output than the Chiefs, just like in general. And the Chiefs are also more spread out at MVP. So honestly, 37% for McCaffrey seems about right at MVP. I think that's very fair as far as a number to have in mind from an MVP. But I think it's worth noting that like he's not, like you said, a no-brainer at MVP where you don't even consider anybody else because he, again, is he's been the Niners highest scoring guy only half the time. So if I have one lineup, is McCaffrey going to be the MVP? Probably, but not quite as firm in that. And 17.5, if he's not an MVP, he's not going to be the highest scoring guy. There are some thoughts to considering looking elsewhere. That brings us to looking at overall perfect lineup trends for similar games, because you did hint at this before and kind of the dynamic we notice in higher scoring games. So you looked at perfect lineups, single game DFS. And what did you notice when you dug into the data on somewhat similar games?
Yeah, so I just gather all the perfect lineups for single game slates on FanDuel. I have 78 in my database with a spread between 1.5 and 3.5. and a total of 45.5 to 49.5. So here are some things that stand out. And of course, you can't apply this blanket because we just talked about someone who's averaging almost 140 scrimmage yards a game with his teammates healthy. So that does, you have to factor all of that in, who's playing and all that kind of stuff. But this can help us get some ideas. Now, especially for those who haven't played a lot of single game DFS, how much salary you actually use is a big part of the conversation. 15 of these lineups, so only 19% spent all 60,000 in salary cap. 36 of them, so 46 in this sample, 46% spent 59,000 or more. So to clarify, over half of the perfect lineups that fit similar spreads and totals saved at least 1,500 in salary. So that means like when you're going through and building lineups and you're like, well, okay, I can get up to a George Kittle or I can get up to a Brandon Ayuk. It's going to be very tempting, but you also have to factor in what kind of contest you're playing. If you're playing against a lot of people, it can be beneficial to get more unique and leave some salary on the table. And I know it feels weird. And, usually whenever we're talking full slate DFS, you don't want to leave a whole lot of salary on the table. Single game, very different ball game. As far as the MVP splits go, quarterbacks are a little less likely to make it as the MVP in these perfect lineups. 30% of the time they get there, it's about 35% for the full average. Of course, you have Patrick Mahomes in the conversation, and Brock Purdy does have more of a ceiling than I think sometimes people realize, but that's noteworthy. This one, running backs 27% of the time, which is down 1% from the full sample average. Of course, we talked about McCaffrey's probability to be the top scorer, at least in my simulation model. So take that one with a grain of salt. But what I do think is relevant here is that receivers have been the MVP 35% of the time in these similar lineups, which is up 10 percentage points from the full sample average. Tight ends are average at 4%, but we kind of have two tight ends so long as George Kittle's healthy, who are more like wide receivers. So again, you don't want to just ignore the tight ends because they don't make it in similar lineups because we have two guys who are pretty much the best two tight ends in football whenever they're good to go. So those are the salary trends and the MVP trends. Do you have any notes on that? Because there's a lot more I can dig into.
I want to hear you dig into the rest too, because I think that'll kind
Okay.
of guide the rest of the conversation.
Okay. So one of the big questions you have to ask when you're building a single game lineup is, are you playing 3 players from one team and 2 from the other? Or are you playing 4 from one and 1 from the other? More that onslaught lineup. 3-2 lineups are more likely in similar games, 65% compared to the full sample of 61%. It's not drastic, but 65% of the time means you should lean toward a more balanced approach than going for the 4-1. The 4-1 definitely, though, has a lot of ceiling potential if this game does get out of hand one way or the other. 33% of these lineups have defenses. 33% have kickers. 60% have a kicker or a defense. So more than half did have a kicker or defense, even in these tight spreads, higher scoring games. But those are actually all slightly lower than the full sample average. So you can probably get away with not going with a defense or kicker. Although I will say I see Jake Moody in a lot of optimizers this week.
With Moody specifically, and honestly with Butker, like I think one thing to note is that we don't have a lot of lower salary guys who get usage on either team. And I think that
Yeah,
does increase the value of kickers because most of the guys who get any volume on these two sides are high salaried. So as annoying as it may be to use a kicker, I think that 60% number of having a defense or a kicker in there, I would not ignore that number, even as
yeah.
much as it pains me.
And yeah, Jim historically does not like to use kickers in
I
single game.
do like I will use them in the right setups. Like if I have a 4-1, I am very likely to have like a lineup with 4 players from one team and 1 from the other. I am very likely in that setup to have a kicker because it assumes a positive game script for them. And kickers are more likely to get work, like get field goal attempts in a positive game script.
Yeah.
I just hate
35.
them, even if I'd use them.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you like, and this will kind of parlay into what I'm going to talk about next. Like, if McCaffrey has a solid game, like you were alluding to before, but Pacheco, Kelsey, Ayuk, like these guys have big games. You need the salary to get to them. So you have to think long and hard about whether you're taking one quarterback or two. It's tempting. It's actually pretty easy if you're not playing McCaffrey to play both quarterbacks. 35% of these perfect lineups, again, with like similar spreads and totals to what we have this week, 35% had two quarterbacks, which is up from 29% on the full sample. Again, you really can't play McCaffrey with the two quarterbacks, but if you're not playing McCaffrey, it is very tempting.
Gross.
What'd you put in there?
I put in McCaffrey with
Oh.
Mahomes and Brock Purdy, and it made it down to 6,500 left for two. I almost said two golfers for two more players, and I want nothing to do with that.
Yeah, and then while we're talking McCaffrey still, because we're just talking McCaffrey the whole show, with a running back at MVP in these types of games, you do tend to see a quarterback make it pretty often still, whether it's not going to be both of them. And again, Pacheco could make it, and you could have like both of them, but so that's what you got to keep in mind with these trends. But 67% of the time, a quarterback makes it, even if the RB or an RB is the MVP, and that's up from 59% on the full sample of running back led lineups, and 76% of the time it was the running back's own quarterback. So that goes into like, okay, maybe it's 49ers, run away with this, McCaffrey, Purdy, or on the flip side, Pacheco scores twice. Mahomes is efficient getting the ball into scoring position. These are the types of things you got to ask yourself whenever you're building your lineups.
So the two things in there that I think are most pertinent are three things. The first one is going all the way back to the beginning about salary. Over on FanDuel, let me share this here. The contest we're sharing right now is the Big Game Bowl, which is 2.2 million in total prizes, but there are 291,000 entries possible in this contest. That means you're going to want to get unique if you want to get first place to yourself, which you should, because it's $1,000,000. And your expected value of a lineup decreases the more times that lineup is duplicated, because it caps the highest amount you could possibly win. So, like, let's say you have even just one dupe. It takes one of the lineup with person with the same lineup in that contest. It takes the most you can win from $1 million down to $500,000. So the bigger the contest, the larger your incentive to deviate. And the easiest way to deviate is by leaving salary on the table, because as opposed to being fixated on that $60,000, you have a lot more combinations at 59.5, et cetera, et cetera. And the further you go down, the more combinations you have. I tend to go with the rule of I would like $1,500 or more on the table. If I have to go up to leaving 1,000 on the table, I will, but like it does pain me a bit. And I think for this specific contest, you're going to want to leave a bit more than that, just in order to try to get yourself a more unique lineup there. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is what you alluded to with the two quarterback lineups, because higher scoring, tighter games, that makes a lot of sense, where we can see more prevalence of two quarterbacks. But then thing number three is the prevalence of a quarterback in there with a running back at MVP. You ran some analysis on correlations between players on these two teams. And I thought the thing that was most reassuring for me within those correlations was that Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey have a very tight tie between the two of them. So that fits a high scoring game, because Purdy needs touchdowns to be a great DFS play, because quarterback scoring is so dependent on touchdowns. And it does fit a script where the Chiefs or the Niners are likely ahead. So again, I'm not tied to having McCaffrey in a single, like if I have one lineup, having a single one in there. But I think if I do go McCaffrey at MVP in that one lineup, I'm very inclined to put Brock Purdy in that exact same lineup at 14.5, both due to the correlations you ran, but also the analysis you had on a quarterback still being pretty likely to be in there, even when a running back is at MVP. So that was kind of my key takeaways from the data you had there. Anything else that you wanted to expand upon there?
Only thing I want to clarify is what Jim's saying about salary is that if you're trying to think about how to win tournaments, like big, large tournaments, it is almost certainly beneficial to consider ways to leave salary on the table. It's not to say that the top salary won't have all 60,000 used. The perfect could. The winner could somehow be unique if you play like a Kyle Juszczyk or something. Like it's possible, but I just wanted to kind of say that it's not that you can never play lineups that are
Right.
using all of the salary cap. It's just, if you're playing with 5 of your friends in a friends league, you don't have to
Do whatever you want. Yeah.
yeah. But whenever it comes to like, what is it, 291,000 entries?
Yeah.
Just think about what it's going to look like if you have maybe there's a pretty easy sort of logical 2 QB lineup you can kind of build with using all the salary. You're probably not the only one to think that. And if your
Correct.
goal is to win $1 million, like it could happen, I guess, with that lineup, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Is that the only thing you
I
want to
just,
clarify there?
yeah, I just wanted
Okay.
to clarify that where we're coming from
Yeah.
a game theory dependent standpoint.
Okay.
When it comes to salary, we're not advocating that the best lineup you can build is leaving salary on the table. It's you're playing against a lot of people in this instance, and I just wanted to make sure we had that buttoned up before we move on and talk about matchups and usage and everything like that.
Okay. So we talked through McCaffrey. Your numbers have him around 37% to be the highest scoring player. I think digging back into the data, that sounds pretty much spot on. So I agree with that, which leaves us with math 63% of lineups to figure out who else we want to put at MVP. Now, I mentioned before that the Niners' highest scoring player in their 10 relevant games with everyone being healthy. So McCaffrey 5 times, Debo twice, Brock Purdy twice, Ayuk once. For the Chiefs, their most relevant sample, I just looked at them since their bye week, excluding week 18, because that's when they kind of tightened up the passing game usages to be more focused on Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. So that's a 10-game sample as well. Rashee Rice has been the highest scoring Chief 3 times, Isaiah Pacheco 3 times. All 3 of those for Pacheco came in games where there was no Jerick McKinnon. So that's noteworthy there for this week. Travis Kelce was twice, Patrick Mahomes twice. So I feel like if I'm not going with McCaffrey, I'm pretty tempted to go with what you had discussed, where wide receivers in higher scoring games are more likely to wind up at MVP than they are in other situations. The Chiefs' highest scoring player during the playoffs, their 3 playoff games, has been Rashee Rice in the wild card round, Travis Kelce in the divisional round, Travis Kelce in the conference championship. So if I'm not going McCaffrey, I'm giving a lot of thought to going towards a non-quarterback in that MVP slot. Where are you on your non-McCaffrey MVP lineups as far as MVP?
Yeah, I'll just say that I have Mahomes around 21% to be the MVP, and Purdy, I think I'm a little higher on him than other places I've seen, just because I think the upside is a little more tangible than I think people quite give him credit for. He's around 16, 17%. So then there's a lot of guys just sort of in that other tier. So the probability still says to go quarterback. And basically, I think what you're kind of asking, even though this isn't exactly what you're asking, it's well, if you're not playing McCaffrey at MVP, my assumption is more that the Chiefs win. And in that instance, I'm looking more toward uh, Mahomes, Pacheco, and look, Kelsey's got a tough matchup, but I don't know if that matters too much because he can get volume based production and a lot of good red zone work. One thing, and again, this is a really hard show to do because there's like game theory and matchup notes. Both of these teams are top 10 in yards after the catch allowed per reception. The Chiefs actually allowed only 2 yards over expectation, 2 yards after the catch over expectation this whole
Total.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah, which and like I think the Falcons had 1, but like every other team had at least 100 because you don't really generate negative yards after the catch like over expectation. But the 49ers are second in yards after the catch per reception allowed. So like there might not be a ton of extended plays, and that makes me a little bit lower maybe on like an Ayuk or a Rashee Rice. So I think I would have to go Mahomes, and I don't think that that's going to be like shocking to anyone, but this is just someone who can have a takeover game if he
Sure.
needs it. And so I would go Mahomes, and then I think I would go Kelsey next.
So let me give you my pitch on Isaiah Pacheco. I know I said pass catcher before, but
Sure.
I mentioned before 10 relevant games since the bye week where they've had their pass catchers being more concentrated and stuff like that. You could narrow that sample a bit more and make it to 7 games that Pacheco has played without Jerick McKinnon in that time. In those 7 games, Pacheco has been the highest scoring Chief 3 separate times. The Niners do struggle against the run. It just hasn't mattered a whole lot this year because they've been in a positive script so often. So they could have success on the ground against this Niners team. If we don't have McCaffrey at MVP, that swings things a bit more towards the Chiefs in terms of game script. And without McKinnon, Pacheco's role has been awesome. It's a 6-game sample, 19 carries per game, 3.7 targets per game, 109.7 yards from scrimmage per game, and a 55% red zone share. That 55% red zone share is actually better than McCaffrey, who's at 49.7%, albeit in a much larger sample of 16 games versus 6 for Pacheco. Pacheco's salary is 12.5. That's pretty nice as well. So I feel like Pacheco is far less likely to be at MVP in single game DFS than Mahomes. So you're getting a bit more unique in that regard, which means you could probably allocate a bit more salary, leave a bit less on the table. And again, he's been their highest scoring guy in 3 out of 7 games in their relevant sample without McKinnon, even when they've had concentrated workloads for the pass catchers. So that's why I think that if I'm not going McCaffrey, maybe I do want to go Pacheco at MVP over someone like Mahomes.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay. Didn't expect you to say that, but I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you said, this is just like so hard to do because I have notes on why I think the Chiefs will be really pass heavy. And it's because teams they have the highest pass rate over expectation against the 49ers compared to any other team. Whenever you look at, there aren't a ton of like top 12 pass defenses that are like below average against the run. There's only 3 matchups for Mahomes in that span, but he has a pass rate over expectation of plus 10.4 in those matchups. Full season, they lead in pass rate over expectation. I just think there's going to be a lot of volume, and from what I've seen, and you don't need volume, you need efficiency. From what I've seen from this team, it really does suggest to me that they're going to go out with what Mahomes gets you. And I know that the box score doesn't look super great, but he is due for a lot more touchdowns than he's had.
Both rushing and passing, I think.
He has not had a rushing touchdown yet this year. This is the Super Bowl. Again, I don't think you can go wrong with Mahomes as your MVP. I don't think anyone would really even give it as much thought as I am, because it's really, I mean, like if we're talking probabilities, it's McCaffrey or Mahomes, and then everyone else is sort of tertiary at best from there. But I would like to know your thoughts and expectations on what we get from Mahomes this week. Is it more of the 250-yard 1 touchdown game, or do you think that we see this team throw the ball a lot against the 49ers based on what we've seen from the Chiefs in the past?
I think that what we've seen from Andy Reid this year is he's a bit more patient and willing to run the football than he has been in years past, which is a credit to him because it's been a criticism of him in the past is that he's a bit too pass heavy. And like you said, that pass rate over expectation, like that's a very big number. So
it's absurd.
The data says they will go pass heavy, but I think that I admire how patient Reid has been this year. And that's a big part of why I feel okay going with Pacheco over Mahomes as like my secondary MVP consideration. So I think to me, I actually feel pretty good about Pacheco in the situation.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm like low on Mahomes, but I do think that I think the Niners match up pretty well against this Chiefs offense from a passing perspective because their issue is with outside wide receivers, and the Chiefs' outside wide receivers suck. It is indoors, which does help Mahomes. He has not played a game indoors since that Vegas game back on November 26th, and he shredded in that game. So I don't know. I mean, like, I'm not gonna like talk him out of Mahomes, but like personally, if I have one lineup and I'm picking a non-McCaffrey MVP, I'd rather go Pacheco over Mahomes personally.
I think you're getting a lot more leverage doing that. So, do you?
That's a big part of the thought process.
Do you rank your MVPs McCaffrey, Pacheco, then Mahomes, or is Mahomes not number 3 for you? Is it somebody else?
Purdy's above Mahomes for me.
Wow.
I think Purdy might be above Pacheco, actually, which might be
after all that.
Well, because like you talked me into, if you're not going McCaffrey, you kind of assume that the Chiefs win, et cetera, et cetera. But no, Purdy's a better leverage play. Am I thinking, like, if I'm thinking about it in terms of like being different in a tournament, which I need to do, I think I should go Pacheco. So I'll put Pacheco 2 just because the leverage he would get me, and I'll put Brock Purdy number 3. Purdy has had tremendous efficiency stats the entire year. His efficiency stats in the playoffs have been very good, despite the fact he's had some like weird looking plays. He's running a bit more too. 6 rush attempts against Green Bay, 5 against Detroit. We saw the scrambling be pretty additive in that game as well. So he has at least some ground rushing upside here as well, in addition to the fact that he can be very efficient as a passer. So it's kind of just like a bet on, if I don't go McCaffrey, maybe the touchdowns happen to break through the air versus on the ground. So I think I go McCaffrey 1, Pacheco 2, Purdy 3, Mahomes 4 is my ranking. But I will still filter in Deebo Samuel. I will filter in Kelsey and Rice, because I think that this game just sets up for being pretty diverse at MVP, because I do think it can break a lot of ways. I know it's not like the most groundbreaking analysis, but I do think that is what the data tells us to do here.
Well, yeah, I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't think about all those options. And one of the things about how this one simmed out for me is like, it's a lot of guys between like 5 and 10% chance to lead in FanDuel points.
Where's Purdy versus Pacheco in that regard?
So like Purdy's like 17%, Pacheco is like 7.5%. Okay. I have a big gap there, but I don't think that they're going to be that much differently rostered. Again, I still think there's like a sort of a negative perception with Purdy's true upside. Now, understandably, and this is like not this also isn't groundbreaking, but he does correlate with individual pass catchers. But I do want to kind of mention, typically when you're playing a quarterback in single game DFS, you're much more open to multiple pass catchers. The 49ers have weirdly had like bad correlations between like Kittle and Ayuk, Kittle and Deebo and Ayuk.
Yeah.
That's descriptive of what's happened in the past. It's not predictive of like what could happen, this week. Kittle and Ayuk could have big games. It is just sort of something that I've noticed when digging into these numbers a bit more, because we dig into different types of numbers for Super Bowl. I think it's relevant. Does that give you any pause? Or if you're playing Purdy at MVP, how are you stacking the 49ers?
I'm probably putting McCaffrey in there. So Purdy plus McCaffrey leaves me 93-33 left. We'll talk about values in a second, but I'm probably going to bring it back with Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Sorry. And that puts me at 10,250 left. Probably a Jake Moody lineup in there, because Moody does correlate well with both Purdy and McCaffrey. Makes sense. You're kind of assuming more of a positive script. Yeah. And then I've got 11.5 left. I can go Ayuk and leave 10.5 on the table, or Kittle and leave, or I can go Ayuk and leave 1,000 on the table, or go Kittle and leave 1.5. I probably lean towards going Kittle there, because it leaves more salary on the table. And I think it's a better matchup advantage for him versus Ayuk. Ayuk's facing the corners for the Chiefs, who are really, really good. So I think that Kittle matches up particularly well against this defense. Again, assuming he gets into full practice by Friday. We're back on the full by Friday. Like, yeah, you're leaving only 1.5 on the table, but it's a 4-1 Chiefs lineup that potentially could get you more unique. Purdy at MVP with McCaffrey not at MVP. I think both those are unique setups. So I do think that that's kind of like my default thought process if I have Purdy at MVP.
Makes sense. I think Jim put together like a logical.
Stupid. No, it wasn't logical because I shouldn't have Purdy at MVP and Moody in the flex because every time Purdy gets a touchdown, Moody's getting just an extra point versus a field goal. So this line would be better if McCaffrey at MVP, Purdy at flex, but whatever.
Well,
I could go
Purdy,
like Niners defense, I guess, instead.
Purdy and Moody do have a pretty strong correlation this year.
Right.
Just kind of shouting that one out. But also, while we're talking correlations, just some other notes I have. Brandon Ayuk, who we haven't talked about a lot. His probability for being the top scorer is pretty low. Just both with my stuff and other stuff that I've been looking into. But he correlates better with Christian McCaffrey than Debo or Kittle, which makes sense because he's not as touchdown dependent.
He's not getting like rushing attempts too. Like
he's
Debo.
not getting rushing attempts. Yeah.
Like I think Debo and McCaffrey do not mesh very well. I am much more likely to use Debo in a non-McCaffrey lineup.
Correct. So if you're looking to maybe build a 49ers heavy lineup, again, anything can happen. Debo and McCaffrey could both have rushing touchdowns. I understand it, but if you're really thinking about what's most likely, Ayuk has had a stronger correlation with McCaffrey. I think that also makes sense. And if this team is going to push the ball, which is interesting because like the Chiefs blitz a ton. They're top 5 in blitz rate.
Yeah.
Almost 38%. NFL average is 29%. But Purdy against 5+ rushers, according to Next Gen Stats, 0.33 EPA per dropback, with the NFL average being minus 0.08. But it's not just like dump offs either. His ADOT's really high. I didn't write that one down when I was looking, but it's like 9.5 yards even against like the blitz. He'll throw it. He'll throw it. So where are you with Ayuk? Because I think we would rank him last of the main 49ers. I feel pretty okay with that.
Yeah.
Frankly. But again,
it's both because like I feel better about other guys, but also again, I alluded to the matchup before where like I just worry about outside wide receivers against guys like L'Jarius Sneed and the other demons the Chiefs have in their secondary. Like they're not a black hole like Fred Warner. Got to bring that one up at least once per show. We're talking Niners, but
you do.
I just think he has the toughest matchup of the group, so I'm lowest on him. And also like because I'm so fixated on McCaffrey, fixated on Pacheco, that decreases the odds I wind up in this range. And like if I could just get to $500 more for Rashee Rice, I'll take the discount on Kittle, stuff like that. I think that's why there are a couple reasons why I wind up being lower on Ayuk. I've got to be lower on somebody. And I think Ayuk is the first one I turn to as far as being lower on them than consensus. And the second one is probably Kelsey due to salary at $13,000.
Yeah, the Chiefs are second in catch rate over expectation allowed to receivers, third in yards per route run. And then as you have Kelsey pulled up here, the 49ers, 5th in catch rate over expectation, 10th in yards per route run allowed, 2 tight ends. But interestingly, they are 27th in target per route rate allowed to the position. So we could see volume for Kelsey. Again, we never break down games to this point until we get to the Super Bowl. Even like the conference championships, we don't do this. But again, both teams are really, really good at limiting yards after the catch.
Yeah.
Kelsey can get yards after the catch, but does not need yards after the catch, which does make him appealing. But I know that it's going to be a really, really difficult matchup for him.
Is it weird to think that Rice is more dependent on Yak than Kelsey? Because in the playoffs, Kelsey has a 27% deep target share versus Rice is at 13%. Kelsey is double that in terms of like deep targets. And he also has a higher overall target share. So I don't know. Like I just said that I would be lower on Kelsey, but like that's because of salary though. He's 13,000, Rice is 11,000. So
yeah,
I think with like overall thought process, Rice is the better play at 11,000, but like I do think he gets dinged more for the Yak discussion you were having as far as like just because he just gets less downfield work than Kelsey does.
Yeah, his ADOT's a lot smaller. But that's one of those questions of like, well, those yards after the catch number are good, but both these teams are good at getting yards after the catch, so it doesn't matter.
Sure.
Like, you can go that route. But yeah, it's hard to look at Kelsey in particular and say he's not going to get double-digit targets, like 85 yards, probably score a touchdown and be really solid. I'm not saying, I'm not like obviously not guaranteeing that, but based on what his workload is and the fact that he doesn't need to break a 75-yard George Kittle kind of tight end route, that's definitely appealing. But yeah, you make a good point with Rice. In the playoffs, he's got 1.3 downfield targets per game, which for me is only 10 yards downfield. Kelsey's at 3.7. It's a pretty big difference. And so that intermediate passing for Kelsey, I think, is very appealing. But we love Kelsey. We love Rice. It's such a weird one to break down too, because there are very few players in this game that are going to sneak up on us. These are two of the most concentrated teams in terms of their workloads that we have to break down, like Rice and Ayuk to this level. So I'm good with both, of course. I think you make a good point with the salary being what it is.
Yeah.
Rashee Rice, 28% target share in the playoffs. Kelsey's at 30%. Obviously, we want it, or at least for me, I'd say, obviously, I'd prefer to have Kelsey if they were the same salary.
Right.
But Rice he's got a very good opportunity to do some stuff on the outside.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to rank, not all of them, but like give me your top 3 from Kelsey to Kittle. I'll do mine first so you can think about it. But this is between $13,000 in FanDuel salary and $10,000 in George Kittle. Considering salary, I want you to rank me your top 3. My top 3 personally are Pacheco 1, Debo 2. It's between Rice and Kittle for 3rd. I think because of the salary, I might lean towards Kittle at 10,000, but like I think he's 3A, Rice is 3B. Well, Rice's target share will be higher. So, okay, I'm going to go Pacheco 1, Debo 2, Rashee Rice 3, George Kittle 4. How are you ranking that range after considering salary?
Am I including Kelsey or no?
Yes.
Pacheco, Debo, Kelsey.
Cool. I think that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk now about value plays. I think you could include the kickers in this discussion too, because Harrison Butker's salary is 95, Jake Moody 9,000, Chiefs defense 9,000, Niners defense 85. But then we get down to guys like Marquez Valdez-Scantling and all of shout out Rich Rebar as always, the ancillary jabronis on both of these teams. I think MVS is a great risk of being in far too many of my lineups. What could possibly go wrong with that? The reasoning for that with Marquez Valdez-Scantling is he ran a ton of routes, actually led the Chiefs in routes run during the conference championship game. So he was out there a bunch. They tightened their rotation. That's benefited, or Marquez Valdez-Scantling has benefited from that. In the playoffs, only a 9% overall target share for MVS, but 27% deep target share. And it seems like the yips might be gone finally from MVS. So I think that matters. You're putting a downfield receiver indoors against a team that does struggle versus outside wide receivers. So I was talking about diversification at MVP. I might not do a good enough job of diversifying my value plays. Yeah. I think we're going to have way too much MVS this week. Where are you on him? And then talking about the rest of the value plays.
So 49ers are top 10 in ADOT. They're 3rd in yards per target allowed on downfield passes. That's something I've tracked a lot with Mahomes and whether he's pushing the ball downfield against teams that try to limit the downfield pass. He did most of the season. He still isn't like completely just, going Jameis Winston and everything's 20 yards downfield. But in the playoffs, he's been much more open to, or I guess the game plan, I should say. It's not just like his decision. It's been more downfield friendly. So that does have me feeling better about MVS. But the lack of value in this game does kind of nullify a lot of what we talked about, because the one lineup you built, I was like, I knew you were going to plug in MVS.
Yeah, of course.
I think we both can just agree and move past the fact that MVS is the best play. Let's say we'll just say below the kickers,
Sure.
maybe even including the kickers. But
Sure.
I might prefer a game script dependent kicker
I think that's
over
fair.
MVS. But who else at 7,500 or I guess MVS is the only one at 75, but who else is in your player pool? Because if it's just MVS, that changes a lot.
It's not just MVS.
Is it Justin Watson?
I mean, like he'll be in my player pool, but I'd really rather not.
Is
I'll
it Noah
use him.
Gray?
Yeah. The downside is people are talking about Noah Gray, and I hate it. This used to be my guy. People are on to him, and it upsets me. But Noah Gray, like they've run a lot of 2 tight end sets.
Quit gatekeeping Noah Gray.
I'm not trying to gatekeep. I'm annoyed that like I used to like him because like he saves a lot of salary, he plays a lot, he runs a lot of routes on the field a whole lot. But if you're gonna give me Noah Gray at non-zero roster rate, hard pass, dude. Like that's rough. I'm still gonna use him, but because $5,500 goes a long way. But like, so I think Bill Simmons has like a same game parlay on FanDuel Sportsbook, and I'm pretty sure Noah Gray is something Noah Gray related is in that same game parlay. I'm trying to find it right now.
2+ catches, I think.
2+ catches. Like, buddy,
also,
I think it's good process on their part, but that's why I hate it because I don't want people on this guy. Like, not because I want his lower roster rate lower, like, oh, he's this well-kept secret. It's because like I can't justify Noah Gray if he's not on like 3% of rosters.
So one thing I like to do, especially in the playoffs, is just run optimizers that you can find through Google.
Yeah. You're just out here Googling DFS optimizers.
Yeah, it's not. I find all these sites. Noah Gray is in. So I found 6. Noah Gray's in 2 of them. The 2 that he's in is they're duplicate lineups. If you play Noah Gray, you have a lot of flexibility of not using all the salary. Of course, optimizers are not going to necessarily care about that unless you change things. But my whole goal is like run an optimizer and see what happens. Yeah. He's probably going to be relatively popular. I don't know though, like if it's ever going to be enough. If you pair Noah Gray's salary savings with saving salary, it's going to offset a lot. So I see the case for it. He got his anytime touchdown.
So he's there. Plus 950 anytime. The prop that they had discussed on the Bill Simmons podcast with him and cousin Sal was like, I think it was Noah Gray first touchdown at 47-1. It's not 48. So they were talking about it. It might not have translated to a lot of action on people's behalf. So maybe I'm overthinking this whole Noah Gray thing. Like I think people sitting on their phones, they're watching Gronk make his kick of destiny. They want to enter in a single game lineup, or do they actually scroll down to Noah Gray? Probably not. So I'm probably overthinking it.
Yeah. So Noah Gray, is he if you're building one lineup?
No.
5 lineups?
Potentially, because I don't want MVS in all 5. Like he's like, right. He's my off ramp for that, basically.
Okay. So we have now MVS, Noah Gray.
I'm okay with Justin Watson. I can get to Juwan Jennings. I talked about some same game parlays I like on Wednesdays covering the spread. And one of those same game parlays was under on receptions for both Juwan Jennings and Justin Watson. But like at their respective salaries, I do understand it. So I think like nobody I love other than MVS, I am willing to consider Justin Watson, willing to consider Juwan Jennings. Okay with Noah Gray. Do you get to Richie James or like, I don't know. It's tough down here.
So I know how quickly this will get shut down, or at least I assume.
Are you going to ask me about Kadarius Toney?
No.
Okay.
If there's no Jerick McKinnon.
Oh, CEH.
The salary is $6,500 in the playoffs without McKinnon. He's at a 25% snap rate. Not a lot of usage on those snaps, but again, if you're playing the angle of the Chiefs being a little bit more patient or something, he runs a okay number of routes. It's not like I think he's a great play. Would he be in the consideration set for you?
Sure.
Okay.
Because like he's been playing a lot of like the garbage third down snaps where they want to rest Pacheco.
Yeah.
They'll take him out and they'll put CH in there for those. Pacheco's getting like the 2 minute usage, which is important, but like they'll put CH out there for like the garbage plays, like 3rd and 18, where Mahomes will scramble for 25 yards. But like, and that's worth something. So I don't love it, but like I don't hate it.
Okay. So it sounds like there's MVS number one.
Everyone else is rotational.
Yeah. And it's tough because when you break down single game normally, there are a few names that pop.
Somewhere.
But with these two teams in particular, everything is so concentrated. It's really difficult.
Does
In
that
the
alter
game,
your view of McCaffrey, knowing how starved we are for value?
so
Like
that
basically,
was
fading McCaffrey allows you to not go as heavy to MVS and allows you not to worry about all these guys we can't talk ourselves into.
so I think we started off the right way talking about why McCaffrey makes a ton of sense. That's not groundbreaking, but he's only 37% likely for me. I think maybe a little bit higher other places, but not substantially so, to lead in FanDuel points. And then you also have the caveat of if you want to save salary, like leave salary on the table, it is really hard to do with
Yeah.
McCaffrey. And you're in a position where you're probably playing MVS or the 49ers defense or something. It makes it a lot harder
Yeah.
unless but if you're building 3 lineups and you want to be like, you know what, I think McCaffrey is the
Sure.
MVP. I think they just lean on
Do
him.
it.
I'll find ways to save set. Like you can make it happen.
Absolutely.
But what's hard is like the 49ers in games with everyone healthy, 84% of their targets go to their 3 pass catchers and McCaffrey.
Right.
And if you include Juwan Jennings, it's 91%. Like there's not a lot to dig into other than that. And for the Chiefs, Kelsey and Rice, let's just say 30% of the targets apiece. Nobody else is getting even 10% of the targets in the playoffs. Like,
including MVS.
yeah. So nobody else we can't really plant a flag in anyone. We can talk about why we like someone. I think you made a great case for why Valdez-Scantling is the best value, but he's also like the first value behind the kickers and the
Yeah, he's
defenses.
not
And
super low salaried.
I think that, he didn't make any of the optimizers that I found. So that's at least something, but it's tough. It is a really difficult slate for value, and that will ultimately play a role in how you view Christian McCaffrey. If I'm playing one lineup, I'm probably finding a way to build around McCaffrey and get weird with it.
Yeah.
That means probably glossing over both quarterbacks, going with maybe even Pacheco and McCaffrey. Say like, okay, the read, even though my default read is that this game has the over, it's maybe a little bit lower scoring.
Or all
Running
that
back
over, all
touchdown,
those points come through those two guys.
like running back touchdowns, field goals from Moody.
Do you have the data from the I have this sheet, so I could just run it myself. But going back to that sample you mentioned, how often do they have 2 running backs in the same perfect lineup? And is that different from the full sample?
2. All right.
Sorry.
Could have asked me this before.
I know. But like if you go with McCaffrey, Pacheco, one of the kickers, and MVS, you can use any of the secondary guys, Kelsey, Debo, Rice, Kittle, and Ayuk you want. You could just use this lineup, duplicate it, swap out the kickers, swap in, other pass catcher, et cetera, and go crazy with that too.
So about 26% of these lineups have 2 running backs.
Okay.
That's not a number that I have. I have a lot of different numbers, but I don't have that one. So just bear with me. This is
26% is pretty high, I think. Yeah. So I'm kind of into McCaffrey plus Pacheco is like I've got one lineup build personally.
159. It's about 28% full sample.
Oh,
So
boo. I hate your data now. I regret asking.
yeah, but 1 out
this.
of 4, and I think it's a very logical way to go. You
With
have
these two
Moody,
guys specifically, given the way they're used, yeah, I think so.
yeah, great usage. If there's no McKinnon, you're getting probably 2 running backs with I'd say 75%, but maybe 80% snap rate. A lot of good usage, a lot of red zone work. And you can do some stuff there, even if you don't play MVS, so you can kind of make it work. So
I'm gonna play MVS, so
I
don't
know,
bother.
but I think if I'm building one lineup, that's really appealing, though.
I think so too. I think I'm glad we talked through this. Took an hour to settle on. Hey, let's just do both running backs together. But like, I do think that's the most appealing build to me personally, is going with McCaffrey plus Pacheco.
Yeah, it's enticing. A lot of ways to go with this one.
Yeah,
but with the lack of value, kind of makes it tricky. So, but that's the fun about single game DFS. You think about every angle. You think about, well, if the Chiefs go up big, what does that do for the 49ers? Like, it's fun.
Yeah, exactly. Any final thoughts for you before we close up shop for today and this year on the NFL side of things?
Thanks for listening, everyone. It's been another fun year for the Heat Check, and I hope that we hit the right MVP this week and have the right core. Let's go.
Get unique. Be willing to forego guys who are amazing cyborg robotic players like Patrick Mahomes. It stinks to root against him. Hold on to your butts kind of slate if you're not on Mahomes as high as consensus is. But I think that's the right way to play things here. And we'll see if we can get this thing to finish off on a high note for 2023, 2024. I never know what year to say.
Is that what you were looking for more for like any final thoughts? Is game analysis?
By game analysis, you mean hold on to your butts? Like, that's what I gave. So
look, there are 7 players who can go bonkers in this game.
Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Noah Gray. Who are the other 5?
Chris Conley.
Okay.
7's probably not even enough. 1, 2,
Yeah.
3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, there's more than 7. So you can't.
Marquez
you can play them all.
Noah Gray. Let's play this out. Harrison Butker. Come on, we got 4 more.
Yeah, but you got to get comfortable just knowing you can't play everyone. Can't play everyone in every lineup. So it's I don't know. I think single game DFS is a blast.
It is. All righty. That is all that we have for today and this year. But don't worry, because there's still plenty of Heat Check. Every Tuesday, we're talking PGA, DFS, and betting. It's now a combo show here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed and over on FanDuel TV Plus. So make sure you check out that show if you want to check out some PGA, DFS. Always a lot of fun. Of course, UFC via Austin Swain, and that's also betting in DFS. And of course, the Daily ISO with Tom Vecchio every weekday for NBA. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm on Twitter at Gdula13, GDULA13.
And I am on Twitter at Jim Saunas. You can find me on Threads at Jim.Saunas and check out FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today and this year. We appreciate all of you, as Brandon said, as always. Good luck to you on Sunday. Enjoy the game. Hopefully it's a fun one. We'll talk to you once again Tuesday for some PGA and next year for some NFL DFS. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.